We welcome you to this, what we hope to be a very motivating and informative workshop on something that a lot of people obviously needs to have a certain amount of enhancement in their life. I have to tell you, it was back in about 1989. I was finishing my second master's degree at a college back east. It was commissioned by Novell, a company in Provo, Utah, to conduct some research. And here's what they started off. Here's the hypothesis that they gave me. They really wanted to provide some education and motivational training for their employees. And they had picked two different areas to do that in. Number one was weight loss, and of course, being healthier. The second one was personal finance and doing things that would be a wise and an appropriate way to approach things as people faced the inevitability of one day wanting, of course, to not have to work for what they make. So here's what they did. They conducted some research first about weight loss. And there was some research that had been done by the Food and Drug Administration at the time that said this. They tried to gauge what's a possibility that someone could actually be successful losing weight. And they found out, and this was the definition that they had for success. They said a person could not only take the weight off that they originally expected to take off, but then keep that weight off for a period of 2 years or longer. You would, with me, I think, assume that that's a reasonable definition of success. And they then asked what percentage of all people that start a weight loss program can actually be successful based upon that definition. When they came back with their research back in 1989, they said that only 1% of all people that ever start a weight loss program can live up to that definition of success. They were stunned by that, and they wanted someone to come in and train and teach and help people to learn how to be more successful with those health related programs. At the same time they were doing that, they also had a little program that they wanted to come up with to teach their employees how to be wise with their personal financial resources. Novell was very successful at the time. The stock had just gone up. It had doubled almost every 6 months for a period of 2 or 3 years. And obviously, they were sitting on the top of some very significant amounts of net worth in the stock that they owned. And they wanted to see if their employees could be wise and do things correctly as they tried to, for themselves, stabilize this source of prosperity that they had. They said as they conducted that research that they found that the vast majority of all people, it was almost similar. What percentage of all people can set up a wisely structured financial program and actually accomplish the objective? They said the results were so similar that they asked me to come down and conduct some research. Here's the way they started that research. They just simply said this. They said if somebody did start some kind of a personal financial plan, what would it take to actually be successful? So we tried to take the same kind of a definition for finance that they had for weight loss, and we started with the fundamental premise of what behaviorally works. Now, so if I just for you just ask this question, if we took everyone who's ever participated in research like this before, or ever participated in some kind of a program, what percentage of those people have been successful with what it is that they intended to accomplish? And what kinds of financial strategies can someone rely on so that as they enter this process, they can be behaviorally intelligent? It was quite a process. It was very fun to go through it. Well, it was, what they did is they had me down for what's called the lunch and learn. And the lunch and learn said this. They said, we're going to pay you $100 for your first hour. After we've done the lunch and learn, if our employees, there was about 200 employees, they said, if our employees, that we give them all a vote, and if they vote to have you back again, then we'll have you back for a second lunch and learn, but this time we'll pay you $200. Now, this gets kind of fun financially. It kind of sings to someone who obviously deals with personal finance and business-related kinds of success. They said this, and then after that second class, if 75% of the people wanted you back again, they'd pay you a double again. So then it'd be $400, then it'd be $800, then it'd be $1,600. I don't know where it is today, but at the time they said I held the record for how many times I'd been asked back. They paid me nearly $10,000 for the classes that we taught to the Novell employees. What we'll cover today is, in essence, what we taught those Novell employees. We believe that there's a lot of light. There's a lot of new light in understanding and recognizing and having perspective on what it is that will be successful or could help you to be success if you'll follow a formula. That's the one nice thing about what we're going to talk about today. We break it down into a fairly fundamental formula. We'll talk about Ben Franklin later on and how Ben Franklin at age 16 years old said, why do people make this so complex? It's actually just a formula. If people would just live the formula and work the formula correctly, there should be no problem in the way that they accomplish these tasks of increasing their personal prosperity or their personal net worth so that the day can come that they could retire or pursue something else other than what they're actually working at right then. Very fascinating process. We just, as we talked to the employees there at Novell, we just simply said this: is it possible that, and this is what happens. I have a lot of clients that will come to me, a lot of people will come to me, and they'll say, is it time that I could retire? And I'll always say, well, great, what is it that you'd like to accomplish? What is it you'd like to succeed? What is your objective in that process? Whenever I ask that question, you kind of hum, you just think for yourself, what would be a definition of success when it came to what you'd like to accomplish financially right now? The definitions over all these years have fundamentally boiled down to one thing. It would surely be nice if I had more money than I'll ever need. And so that's why we've called this first workshop, More Money Than You'll Ever Need. Is it possible with behaviorally efficient formulas? I have to emphasize that with the greatest enthusiasm, because there's a lot of financial workshops that you'll go to where someone will step up and say, I'll teach you how you're going to be successful. You need to have very complex investments. You have to own your own business. You have to take a lot of risks. You have to be on the cut. You just need to be out there thinking about, talking about, maybe doing positive financial affirmations every single day in front of a mirror to make it so that somehow you can be successful financially. Here's my question. Is there a formula, a fairly straightforward formula, that if you follow that formula for the rest of your life or through the rest of the days that you're going to be working, is it possible that in a behaviorally efficient way, you'd substantially increase the probability of your success by being true to the path and straight to the formula that we've discussed here? I think you might find it very fascinating. So when I say more money than you'll ever need, I want to first just tell you this. Our students at BYU have come up with as part of this, what we call the science of personal prosperity. We found that we truly do believe it is a formula. We found, and we'll talk about it later in our classes, the science of personal prosperity contains three different things. Number one, behavioral intelligence. Doing things that we know have some strong probability of success because we've done the research with all those consumers and all those individuals who've tried that in the past. Is it possible to have success based upon the behavior that we have? The second is what we refer to as financial intelligence, and that's obviously with the kind of information, the tools that we have available today. It really has been substantially or almost exponentially, we've leapt forward in the kind of information we have, the technology that's made available to you. Sadly, with all that new information and all that new technology, we found that most people are still not doing what they'd like to do, so we'd like to increase that if we can. The third is what we call community intelligence. We'll talk about that when we get to it, but that's just understanding this. You're not in this by yourself. There'll be a lot of partners in the way. There'll be a lot of mentors. There'll be a lot of relationships that you'll develop that'll make it so that you could, from those relationships, from those mentors, from those partners, increase the probability of your success. As we've done that, the students have been very efficient, and this has been a fun process as we've gone through and tried to figure out what are the kind, and the students have really done the research that's behind, that has justified a lot of these concepts that we believe as you learn them, you'll find that this can indeed be a fairly simple, a much simpler process, or much more efficient. Let's not use the word simple because obviously that might express the wrong connotation. A much more efficient process than we've come to know in the past. Here's what we're going to do. In order to have more money or more income than you'll ever need, we first have to know how much. What would the income be? We can talk all we want to about having more income, but what if it's not enough income for you? What if it's more income? So maybe the target's higher than what you need. You have to kind of first for yourself establish an idea or a concept of how much money you'd have to have in order to be satisfied or to be happy or to be fulfilled with what it is that you've been given. So let's just try a couple of them with you. These are actual individuals who contacted me at some point in time and said, listen, we'd like to come talk to you. We're making some pretty darn good money, but it's not working very efficiently. So here's some numbers I'll give you. Would any of these numbers be okay for you? The first is $1 million a year. The second is $750,000 a year. The third is $650,000 a year. The fourth is $450,000. Of course, when I say that, most everyone will say, yeah, yeah. If I could have that much income for the rest of my life, then I'd probably be okay. That would be sufficient. The interesting thing is this. Each of these, I picked these four individuals. I have a number of people that will come that have very similar situations. But these four individuals, they're real people that came to me at some point and said, the formula's not working. It's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. We'd like to see if you can help us kind of perk this thing up. They're real people. But when it came to saving any of all this income that they had, ultimately they were saving nothing. Now, I add one thing to it that kind of gives it a touch. I only say this not in any kind of a personalized way, but in a way that kind of makes sure you understand these are not high flyers that are sailing around the world and painting the town red and doing all the luxurious, wonderful things you'd ever imagine. At the time, each of these individuals, and that's why I picked them, when they came to me, they were currently serving as LDS bishops. Now, look, they could be any kind of an ecclesiastical authority. They could be any kind of a business leader. They could be any kind of a professional leader. In this case, so it kind of brings it kind of close to home to know that these are people of wisdom. They're people of experience. They're people of countenance. They're people of kindness. They're compassionate. They're everything you'd imagine a person would want to be, I hope. But for some reason, when it came to saving money, they simply did not have the formula down. They could not figure out a way to do that very efficiently. So they would come with they and their wives. They'd come to Salt Lake City, and we sit down. We go through some. I'd ask them to do the same thing any financial advisor would. Can you kind of add up for me what kind of income that you have right now, what your expenses are, and let's see if we can start to make some sense of what it is you're doing right now. When they got there, I simply said this to them. I said, look, you've got one of two different ways to do this or to accomplish the objective. If you're going to start to save something and start building for retirement, start building for a future where you can do what it is you choose to do, then you got to do one of two things. Now, this is not rocket science. Watch this. You've either got to make more money, make more income, or you've got to decrease your expenses in some kind of a significant way. Whew. I guess as a good financial advisor, I would always start off with that concept of expenses. It would seem like with that kind of income, there'd be some way that you might be able to manage your expenses a little more efficiently so that you'd be able to start accomplishing the kind of objectives that you would like. There's a scripture that I like, that I've always used. I think it's marvelous. It comes from the Book of Mormon. It just simply says this. It says, do not spend your money for that which is of no worth, nor your labor for that which cannot satisfy. I thought that was a pretty good definition. I think that was a great way to start our conversation. So do not spend your money for that which is of no worth. Is there something about the way you're spending in these different categories that you and I would look at right now and say, there might be some ways to be a little more efficient? I want you to know, I remember these 4 conversations very well. Those people's images are still on my face, or in my mind, I can see them as if they were here today. In fact, we're standing in the room right now that I met all 4 of those individuals. And as I met them, we would go through this conversation, and we'd say, is there some way you can decrease those expenses? We'd go through each one of them. I want you to know that in each case, there was some kind of debate. In some cases, there were some angry words. There were some tears. There was some emotion involved in it. As we get going in our class, I'll give you some better indication of what might have caused that frustration. But suffice it to say, and for our purposes right now, let me just tell you this. At the end of our conversation, with each of those 4 individuals making that kind of money, the husband would simply turn and look at his wife and say, honey, we need to make more money. For some reason, with the kind of income that they were making, it just seemed as if the ways that they had chosen to spend their money was so standard, was so specific, and was so locked in that there was no way that they could even imagine the possibility of decreasing any of those expenses. And are they alone? There was some research that was done by a group, the Gallup research people. This has probably been 15, 20 years ago. But they did this. They just took people that came from every different income category, from $50,000 a year up to $500,000 a year. And they asked this very fundamental, they talk with them about what they were doing with their finances and what they're doing with their long-term financial objectives, whatever. And then they, at the end of their research, would give them about 10 or 20 different kinds of things that said, would you please rank these as to what it would take for you to begin to accomplish the financial objectives that you'd like to accomplish? And they said 80% of them put as their number one leading answer, just need to make 10% more money. So whether they're making $50,000 a year or whether they're making $500,000 a year, what was the concept? If we could just make more money. Now you for yourself decide, does there ever come a point in time? Can we imagine there ever coming a point in time that relative to the income that we have, that we could say, but it would be nice if our decisions could be made in such a way that the answer was not just make more money, that we could actually be more efficient with those resources. I think you'll love it when we have the opportunity to show you some ways of doing that, and in many cases, not even sacrificing anything more than just the time and the initial energy it takes to do the right things. I want to put it in one more in one more perspective for that I think will be. So this is the case of how much income we'll be making. how much income is necessary. My next question is this: what is the happiest income in America today? So happy. Most people would say that's the ultimate cause and design of our existence is to be happy. That's what we want to do is be happy. And so even our income, would it be nice to know that we have the ability to turn our income into something that causes or helps us to generate a sense of happiness on an ongoing basis? Wait till you see the research. There's some research conducted. It's probably been 10 years ago, at least 10 years ago since this was conducted by Daniel Gilbert at the Harvard University. And they went through all the different levels of income. And what they do is they'd ask each individual, based upon their, no matter what their level of income was, what their level of happiness was. And they'd take people right down to $20,000 a year, and they'd start talking about their level of happiness. Then they'd go to 25, they'd go to 30, something like that. So they'd go in increments, and they would say, what we wanted to do was find out, when does happiness top out? When does more income not create any additional happiness? I like to joke with people and say that we have absolute confidence in the research that was done because the numbers were first reported on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And whatever year he went on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and he said that the happiest income in America today was, went right past it, $40,000 a year. $40,000. That was per household. He literally at that time said, we can, in our research, detect no additional level of happiness once someone's income goes above that amount. So $40,000 a year, that's it. If you don't think that number is important, there's a lot of corporations and other entities that have paid me a lot of money to come and teach their employees that that's the happiest income in America today. Nothing else will make you happy, so no additional amount of income will make you happy. So let's work on some other possibilities. I almost said it. Okay, now, at the same time, there was some research being done at the Yale University. They had what we might want to say is a more academically anticipated or expected answer when it came to research being done at an institution of higher learning. They simply said this: the happiest income in America today is an income that's slightly higher than your nearest neighbor or your closest relative. And it makes sense. We are beings that are happy relative to someone else. We are sad relative to someone else. We are satisfied relative to someone else. As we see others and we compare ourselves to who they are and what they're doing, it gives us a sense of whether we're being successful or not. And with that success comes a quantity of happiness or sadness, as the case may be. A lot of people can't relate to that when it comes to happy, but you for yourself can understand what it means. Like your next door neighbor or something like that seems to be doing just fine, and suddenly there's some financial reversal in your family that makes it so that it's not quite the same as it's always been. And you can see why that can really be a very substantial part of what we use or utilize as our definition of what makes us happy. I'm going to put some other kind of a context on it like this right now. I think you might be very fascinated to watch this. So happiness, what kind of income, what kind of assets, something like that. Where does happiness come from when it comes to this finance that we're talking about? Here's an individual, Jack Whitaker. Jack Whitaker, a few years ago, won the Powerball lottery, $315 million he won in the Powerball lottery. I like to ask my students, I say, okay, who would be happy if that happened to you? And of course, every hand will go up. I then say, okay, I'm going to contrast that with an individual who's involved in an accident and became a paraplegic for the rest of his life. Which would you choose when it comes to your personal level of happiness? Would you like to be the guy that won the lottery or the guy that became paraplegic? Can I just tell this once again? Some great research was done. And in this case, they took 22 major lottery winners and they took 22 paralyzed accident victims. And in their research, they fundamentally called this, or ended up calling it, based upon the results of their research, they call it adaptation level theory. What they found was that in 3 years, basically the happiness of those two individuals were about the same. They were overall, their quality of happiness in life was about the same. And surprisingly, within 5 years, they found out that those who had been involved in those accidents that left them paralyzed reported a higher level of happiness than those who had won the Powerball lottery or won these very substantial amounts of money in lotteries. What does that tell us? I have to tell you, we're going to talk a lot about it. We're going to talk a lot about it in the rest of our classes. This thing about adaptation, what does it say? Whenever we receive anything that's a number, a title, a specific reward, something that we have always wanted, and we get in a very specific or tangible way, we quickly adapt to the level of happiness and will return to the same level of happiness that we were prior to receiving that. This guy, Jack Whitaker, within 2 years of receiving that Powerball lottery, went on national television and in tears, he said, if I could give all that money back tomorrow, I would. It's absolutely destroyed my life. Now, I know you'll be like every other person who's ever come to one of my classes. You'll say something like, okay, give me all that unhappiness that you want to. I think I'll take that. You have to listen very carefully. There was a book once written about individuals, and they researched a lot more than 22 people. And they said that after 5 years, their research was this, after 5 years, 85% of all those people reported that their quality of happiness had gone down after receiving that big chunk of money. So, in other words, a big dollar amount, a big new title, a big new success that we've accomplished for ourselves. We'll tell you later what it is that we ultimately believe causes or creates that additional level of happiness. But for right now, could you just imagine for yourself this concept where whether it's being paralyzed or whether it's winning this massive Powerball lottery, there's a fairly good chance that neither one of them will have a great deal of long-term impact on our happiness or our sadness. Kind of interesting concepts. So what we've done is this. With our students at BYU, we came up with this thing. Really, we started this back at Novell when we were there. We ultimately called it our point of choice. I want to talk to you about what the point of choice is. Imagine for yourself this. Choice. That's what we all seek. I hope that's at least in our research we find that people say would make them happy is to have choices, to have options, to have possibilities that they could pursue without having to feel like they're obligated to do. So when is the point of choice according to our definition? We just say by definition, the point of choice is this. It's the day that you have the choice whether or not to work for income, because your financial needs will be provided by the financial assets will provide more income than what you need. Now, just think for a second. This is kind of a major shift for a lot of people. A lot of times we work, all of us are working today to derive what we refer to as earned income. I go to work, I get a paycheck, I get that paycheck based upon the kind of quality income, the quality work that I provided for the company that I'm working for. So we call it our earned income. That's what we had to work for. We hope that during the years between the time where we are right now and the time that we want to retire or hit this point of choice, we hope that we can accumulate some financial assets. We'll talk right now about what those financial assets are and what they're supposed to be. We want to accumulate enough financial assets. These financial assets are the ones that generate income. They might generate dividends or interest or rental income or there's all sorts of different types of income that they can generate. We would like to make it so that the income that was generated from those financial assets will be sufficient to replace the income that we have to earn right now. Do you see then why we call it the point of choice and say that's the day when you can decide whether or not to work for income? Now, some people will decide at that point in time to continue to work for income. Some might not. Some might decide to go on missions. Some might decide to go do humanitarian projects throughout the world. Some might decide to golf for the rest of their lives. Some might, you see the point. The concept is just that you have the choice of whether or not to work for income, and that's the kind of concept that we want to work for. So in our point of choice, we're going to talk about an individual who got very good at this, very inspiring in the approach that he took, at least as I see or our research shows what he did. Most of you have heard of the guy by the name of Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin, at age 16, get this. This is one of those moments you got to kind of sit back and take a deep breath and make sure you don't miss the point of this. Ben Franklin, at age 16, sat down and in his journal he wrote down, I don't see why people make this financial process so difficult. He said it's just a formula. We started off by saying, Ben Franklin said it's just a formula, and here's where he made that decision. He said if you just live the formula, then there could come a point in time where you'd not have to work for more money. You could actually work for lots of things you'd like to accomplish. Here's something most people don't know. Most every single thing that we know Ben Franklin as, or the accomplishments that he made, were accomplished after he hit his point of choice. But even more importantly, they were in his mind planted at age 16. He already by that time knew that he wanted to one day be an ambassador for the United States. He already knew by that time of inventions that he wanted to make. He just logicked. He, in his mind, said, if I ever want to come to the point in time that I can dedicate the time, emotional energy, and intellectual enthusiasm to those things I want to accomplish, I can't wake up every morning worried about whether I can pay the house payment or not. So he set out. What he did is this. He said, at age 16, he said, I want to be done by age 42. Isn't that amazing? He actually, in his mind, said, I don't want to work forever. I want to be. Of course, you got to remember that the average age that people lived to, longevity back at that time, was not that much longer than 42. So he wanted to be done by 42. Can you imagine a 16-year-old boy wanted to be done by age 42? He set out on this path, and I want you to know that every single thing that we've ever known about Ben Franklin since that point in time came after he had age 42. And I want to tell you with some enthusiasm, he didn't win a Powerball lottery. He didn't run fast and jump high and play in the NBA. He didn't inherit any money. He literally was an employee for printers during that period of time. I will emphasize with the strongest possible enthusiasm, everything that we've done here is designed for the average income, for the average household, for the average individual that's pursuing whatever it is that they'd like to do. Whether you want to be a printer, in this case, that's how he did it. You want to be a policeman, you want to be a school teacher, you want to select one of those careers that might not make a king's ransom when it comes to your income. These are all possible accomplishments based upon you doing, just take a deep breath and imagine doing what you ultimately want to do and not what you feel like you have to do based upon the kinds of income that you can make from it. I'll show you where that's the case. So just for right now, I'll just finish it off by just saying this. What would you accomplish if you reached your point of choice? I do believe. Here's your first homework assignment. I do believe that if you'd stop and pause, and maybe tonight, before you go to bed, when you're saying your prayers, ask this very fundamental question. If I hit my point of choice, and I was at a time that my financial assets were so large that the income that is derived from my financial assets are large enough that it would replace all of my earned income, what would I do? There was Ben Franklin's list. Imagine for yourself, I'd like you tonight, before you go to bed, to come up with 3. Literally just outline 3 things. It's amazing the differences that you'll see. Some people would say, I would want to just move on to humanitarian projects and just save the world from destruction and fortune and famine and plagues and pestilences and curses or something like that. That's great. Some others would say, I believe that I can accomplish the possibility of owning a business that provided a lot of people the opportunity to become providers for their family. And so therefore, there's a lot of people who would just simply say, I want to be a good multiplier. I want to multiply resources throughout the rest of my life and always be found to be someone who can multiply resources. But see, that's why it'll be so helpful for you to come up with your own. What ultimately, from this point, would help you the most? We're going to find out that if you can in any way visualize some kind of an end run, something that you could put on the refrigerator door that would motivate you the most, it substantially increases the probability that you'll accomplish the objective, and we believe that you can. So with our point of choice, we want to do this. I just talked with you about what a financial asset is, so I want to go through and tell you, make sure that you understand financial assets and earned income and unearned income. We today each have living expenses. No matter who you are, there's some expenses that you got to incur to live. You got to eat. You got to have lights. You got to have the gas on so you can have some heat. You got to buy a tie. You got to have a shirt. You got to do whatever it is that you feel like you need to have. We have what we call our living expenses, which today we go out and we earn income to have the income that's necessary to provide for those expenses. That's not rocket science. Most people can understand that very clearly. But here's kind of the amazing leap for a lot of people. Our goal in this process, and what we're doing right here, is to somehow come up with a way that we have financial assets that are large enough that the unearned income, the rents, the dividends, the interest, the royalties, whatever it is, are sufficient to replace our living expenses, not only now, but to replace those living expenses forever. Many people have taken to calling that our nest egg. That's it. That's what we kind of put aside on an ongoing basis to make sure that indeed we do have those resources that are necessary. So what we'll just do is make sure we know what those financial assets are. So if you have to have financial assets that are going to generate the unearned income, for those who are not familiar with financial assets, we'll just say this. We also sometimes in our classes and in the industry, we do the same thing. We call them our capital assets. They're assets that increase in value, or at least are designed and have increased in value over the past. So they're things like stocks that pay dividends, or bonds, CDs, or savings accounts that pay interest, real estate that pays rent, notes that pay income. All of those are the types of things that will make it so that that asset will increase in value over time, along with sometimes as we're holding on to any one of those assets, not only do they pay these forms of current income, but they also have what we refer to as capital gain income. Capital gain just means that the value of the asset increases over time. So I go out tomorrow, and I buy some Google stock. And after I've bought my Google stock goes up in value. I might have bought it when it was trading at $250 a share, and before long, it was up to $400 a share. And so the difference between $250 a share and $400 is a capital gain. So we hope, that's what we're doing. We want to make sure that the gains and the income, we call that the total annual yield. The total annual yield from those investments will be sufficient that it will generate the income necessary to replace our living expenses, and we want to do that forever. We'll talk about forever and why that can be changed over time because of something that we refer to as inflation. We want to make sure that we keep that in check. So let's just kind of start off. This is a big number. This is the kind of things that you come to a class like this for. It's very fascinating. So what we want to do is this. We want to give you a number. And it's surprising to me how few people know what that number's got to be. What I mean by a number is a goal. What's the long term? What's the light at the end of the tunnel? Whenever I teach this class in other areas of the country, especially back east, it seems like everyone knows their number. They've just grown up with that. They understand it very clearly. When I teach it out west, it's just not as ingrained in the way people are cognizantly aware of what they're doing. So we're not going to let you get out of class today without knowing what your number is. And here's how our number works. What we're going to do is start it off based upon whatever age you are. We're going to then say this entire chart will be based upon reaching your point of choice at age 65. Some people call that retirement. We don't really like the word retirement because for a number of different reasons. But for right now, we're going to say this. This will all be based upon reaching your point of choice by age 65. So let's say this, depending on your age, we have to know then how many years you've got to your point of choice. Once we know how many years you've got to your point of choice, we want to find out what those required assets have to be. In order to know what the required assets have to be, we have to have a beginning income. Have to know what's the income going to be that you're going to start off with pulling out of your financial assets each year. Now, you remember we talked about the happiest income in America today is $40,000. I will tell you now, there's been some other research that suggests it's 70. The fun thing is that either number 40 or 70 is far below what an average person thinks would be a great income, but it's not from our research what actually turns out to be. So now watch how this works. So let's assume that right now you're 65 years old. If our chart is based upon a 65-year-old individual hitting their point of choice at 65, then how many years do you have till your point of choice? You've got no years to your point of choice at all. And if we started our chart off with an income, now we want to be in a raw happiness. We're not going to do $40,000 a year. We're going to say right now. Now think about this. For the person that's just that's barely starting out, it's not thought about this before, it does take a little kind of a creative leap to get to this point. So think about it. I'm going to retire today. I'm going to hit my point of choice. I'm going to go to humanitarian projects for the rest of my life. That's what I choose to do, not work for more money. I want to know if I wanted an income of $50,000 a year, and here's the cool thing, we're going to let that income adjust for inflation. We'll talk about inflation just in a second. Then you could ask yourself this question, what would my point of choice, what would my required assets have to be right now because I'm 65 and I want to retire right now? Just know that the number is $1.25 million. That's what the financial assets would have to be. And I'll show you, based upon all of our assumptions, that would allow you to pull out $50,000, plus the next year, pull out enough to reflect or to compensate for this funny thing that we refer to as inflation. Let's talk about inflation, make sure you understand and see how detrimental it can be in retirement to make sure that you're well prepared for it. Here's what we'll do is this. Let's assume that the inflation adjustment is 4%. Over the last 80 years, I think the actual inflation rate has averaged about 2.77% each year. But for right now, we're going to just be very conservative and make sure that you're well prepared and assume that the amount of income that you have to pull out is going to increase by 4% per year. So if we had $50,000 that we're starting off with right now, and we had inflation of 4%, we're going to pull out 50% in the first year, what would that mean that we have to pull out in the second year? So 4% of $50,000 is $2,000. Excuse me, the inflation at 4% is $2,000. That means that if that basket of goods and services, now we haven't used that term yet, so let me just make sure you understand this. We do that in economics. Anybody's ever taken an economics class before has heard that before. That's what we select today to spend my money on. That's what it costs me to satisfy my expectations today. That's the basket of goods and services that I purchase for myself. If in the first year that costs $50,000, if inflation goes up by 4% this year, how much will that basket of goods and services, the exact same basket of goods and services, cost next year? It's going to cost $52,000. So we've got to set this up. We've got to have our numbers prepared to make it so that this year I can pull out 50. Next year I can pull out 50, and if I pull out 52 that next year, and it goes up by 4%, then I got to pull out $2,080 more in the next year, which means I got to pull out $54,000 in the second year. What would be the third year now? In the fourth year, $56,000. Can you see what happens in 5 years? Within 5 years, the amount of money that I have to pull out in order to buy that, remember, it's still the same basket of goods and services that I'm going to use to purchase with my money. In order to buy that same basket of goods and services, I have to have $60,832. That's the devastating impact of inflation. But when you take the class here and you learn it through the source that we're dealing with, you'll see that you'll be prepared to do that if you have $1.25 million in assets if you're at age 65. Let's keep going. What if instead of at age 65, I'm 60 right now? If I'm 60 years old, how many years do I have before I get to my point of choice? I have 5 years. Now remember, you just saw 5 years from now, that same basket of goods and services is going to cost how much? $60,000. So let's start. If we're going to start when we hit our point of choice in 5 years, we're going to start pulling out $60,000 a year. Then what would my assets have to be worth? Because the income I'm going to pull out is so much more. My basket of goods, my point of choice required assets have to be $1.5 million. Should be easy from that point forward. Rewind the tape, do whatever you needed to make sure that you've got those two concepts down, because now what if I'm 50 years old, so I've got 15 more years before my point of choice. Now that income that I'm going to start pulling out when I first start the process is $90,000. My required assets go up to $2.3 million. If I'm 40 today, so I got 25 years to go, look at how much that income's got to be to buy that same basket that costs $50,000 today. That would mean that my point of choice assets will have to be worth $3.3 million. If I'm 30, that's 35 years. It's 4.9. Look what I tell my students at BYU. Watch this. If you're in your 20s today, if you're in your 20s, early 20s, which most of the students there are, it means that if they're going to retire at age 65 or hit their point of choice by age 65, they're going to have 45 years to go. Look at the income that it would take, $292,000 to purchase then, 45 years from today, what costs today only $50,000. The number that I give them is $7.3 million. Now, it's at that point that most people take a kind of a breathless, they roll their eyes and breathlessly say, this is just not for me. There's no way I'll ever have those kind of assets. You stick with us, because I can show you where indeed you can do it. You can accomplish the objective. This is not only possible, it's highly probable if you follow the formula that we've talked about. Now, some of you are going to say, hey, listen, $50,000. I'd like to see if I could kind of soup this thing up to make it so that instead of $50,000, a basket of goods and services costs $50,000, I'd like one that costs $100,000. Do you see why it's so nice to work with a number like 50? Because if I was first of all calculating what would it cost to do it at $50,000, and then said now I want to have it be worth $100,000, what would it take to do that? All I have to do is just double all those numbers. There's your $100,000 a year income now, and all those numbers we just talked about double, so that my 20-year-old by age 45 would have to be worth, by age 65, 45 years from today, would have to have point of choice financial assets worth $14.6 million. You say, not a chance. But stick with us, because I think I've got some fun things that I'm going to tell you. Because what we want to do is start off working on what that formula is going to be. What we want to imagine is this: the most profound key to personal financial success, the most profound, is found in a formula or a plan that you can follow when everyone else succumbs to impulsive behaviors and to market manias. That is sadly the biggest single devastation that we have today in this planning process, is no matter how committed we are, no matter how focused we are, no matter how much we believe in ourselves, no matter how many times we stand in front of that mirror and do positive affirmations, there'll come a point in time when we'll want to kind of drop out of this. That point will most likely come when there's some kind of an emotion, some kind of a fear, some kind of a behavior, some kind of a mania that will make it so that somehow we get off course and quit doing what it was that we intended to do. I can't wait to tell you about investments and how you invest your money so that you don't succumb to these kinds of problems. For right now, I want to introduce you to that formula, though. Here's what we're going to do. Our point of choice formula is going to relate, and it's a formula. Now, remember, I've talked about this. This is for anybody. This is not, I know you'll see in this that this does not require some kind of extreme risk or extreme, own your own business strategy or all those kinds of things. It's available to anybody. Here's what it is. We have the H, the X, a 1, and a 1. And we'll start immediately telling you what each one of those means. Our first thing that we want to talk about is that H. And surprisingly, I know a lot of you, when you first see it, will say, that seems fairly obvious. Like, why wouldn't we want to do something like that? What I'd suggest to you highly is that you purchase a home. I know that sounds to be like, wait a minute, a home? What does that got to do with a financial plan? Wait till you find out how much it does have to do with a financial plan. No, first of all, it's a great financial asset. And know this, when I talk about behavior, now think about this for a second. When I talk about behavior, our research shows that 75% now stick with me. Sometimes when I'm kind of giving you a number, it's easy to roll off your back and roll glibly from any existence that you kind of imagined when you first came to class. I want you to think deeply about this number when it comes to what works. We found that 75% of all people that purchase a home in America, 75% of all people that reach age 65 in this country will own their own home or own a substantial portion of their home. Think about that. With all those numbers we started off with, weight loss, 1%, financial plans, long-term, 1%, now we're saying 75% of all people who reach age 65 in this country today will either own their own home or they'll own substantial equity in their home. A great financial asset, which we'll show you later on will be even better. So let's just kind of get a visualization. It won't take us long, but this is kind of, because a lot of people that are listening to this right now probably already started to purchase a home or maybe even purchased the home, and just take this moment to pat yourself on the back for not only having a home, but maybe even thinking about owning a home. If you don't even have a think, maybe hope to one day own a home, if you've allowed that to become part of your conscious approach to accomplishing objectives in your own personal prosperity, you're in great shape. Let me show you what happens. Today, if we took the median home price in America today, median, just the standard, that's average. There's different types of averages. We won't get into that because it's beyond the perspective of our class. If we took the median, the average home price in America today, we just say this, is about $250,000. So you got my home today, about half of all the homes available in America today are worth less than $250,000. And about half of the homes that are available today in America are worth more than $250,000. But here's our question. If I'd have bought that home 40 years ago, how much would I have spent for that home? If I'd have bought that exact same home, and it was available 40 years ago, we'd have probably only spent about $24,000 for that home. And I know young people cannot see that. They just say, how could a home that you spent $24,000, first of all, they can't believe that anybody ever bought a home for $25,000. But how in the world could a home that was worth $24,000 then be worth $250,000 today? That's a stunning number. I will tell you this, ask anybody that's over 50 today what they spent for their first home. If they're over 60 or maybe into their 70s, they spent $8,000 for their home. It's just stunning what they've done in value. But just know this, what if those numbers are all correct and you bought that home 40 years ago for $24,000? Here's my next question. What if it's now worth $250,000 and if real estate inflation, and this includes the massive drop that we saw in 2008, what if real estate inflation continues to improve over the next 40 years exactly like it has over the last 40 years? What would that home be worth 40 years from today? Now, a good mathematician already has the answer. But if you that's just not one of the things that's your forte, watch this. Can you see that $250,000 is about 10 times as much as $24,000? So it's actually increased or multiplied in value 10 times or 1,000% of its original value. if it continues to do the exact same thing over the next 40 years, what will it be worth 40 years from today? 40 years from today, that exact same home will be worth $2.5 million. I know you can't believe it, you can't see it, you can't imagine it, but if you'll just for right now say, that's inflation, that's real estate, and that's exactly how it's behaved on the average over the last 40 years. Whew. Can you imagine just taking the dive? I can't tell you how many people, the first home they ever bought, they laid awake in bed for 3 nights worried about how they're going to come up with the payment. But for right now, if you do it wisely, we'll teach you later on what a successful real estate purchasing formula is, so you'll know exactly what that will be. If you just purchase it wisely, use the wisdom of all times and the counsel from all of those who really can help you in a very appropriate way, I'll just tell you, just buy a home. It's so cool. I have to tell you this because I know that you'll relate to this. As I was doing this work at Novell, our focus was strictly on behavioral intelligence. After we'd done our work there was at the LDS church, there was a man by the name of Stan Peterson who had me come there and consider the possibility of teaching this to LDS employees. As we did that, and we went through the whole thing, we had a delightful conversation. He was very engaging. He asked great questions. He shared great insights. But at the end of the whole thing, he stood back and he said, you know, those 3 things you're talking about right there, that's what the scriptures and prophets have been telling us to do forever. Can I just tell you in a strong, very strong and very hopefully a convincing way, I believe this is not just behaviorally intelligence, this is spiritually intelligent. I believe this is the kind of things that the prophets and the scriptures have been teaching us to forever to do in such a way that if you'll just do that, you'll actually have the assistance or the partnership or the wisdom, not only this earth, but perhaps of eternity behind this process. I will just tell you that every single prophet since Joseph Smith, every single one of the latter-day prophets have said at some point in time that have encouraged the saints to own their own home, to buy a home. It provides not only for financial security, but also provides for peace and comfort and safety in the midst of times of crisis. They've quoted it a number of times. You heard Gordon B. Hinckley say, my wise father taught me to purchase a modest home. Remember, I kind of emphasize that word modest home, and then pay it off as quickly as possible, never incurring more debt against that house unless it was absolutely critical. So let's just kind of stick with that for a second. Say, what if we just use that same spirit or that same logic to say, not only would it be behaviorally efficient, but it'd also be very spiritually efficient. I can show you that that's indeed what we've been encouraged to do for a long time, and that's what he was impressed with. So now what I want to do is this. I want to talk about what home compounding is. Now, so for some of you that have never seen it before, this whole concept of compounding, what does it mean that it goes up by a certain amount of money every single year? When I have my students in my class, I have a little fun with them, and I say, look, we're going to assume that our home's value is going to be $250,000 that we're starting off with. We're going to have an annual growth of income by 6%. I then tease the students a little bit, and I say, you need to purchase a little fixer-upper home, and I show them a kind of a nice possibility of one that could use new occupants on a regular basis, so they're always looking for someone to occupy the home. But I use it all in fun just to suggest this. Here's how it works. So if I bought a home that was $250,000, here's my assumptions. My home's worth $250,000. I'm going to have an annual growth rate of 6%. In the first year, if that $250,000 home grows by 6%, it would grow in value by $15,000. 6% of $250,000 is $15,000. So by the end of that first year, my home would have gone from $250,000 up to a value of $265,000. Doesn't look very impressive until you see what happens over time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out the columns for you and show you how this thing increases over time. But it all hinges upon your ability to see 2 things. Number one, what happens when it goes up by 6%, and to see this. In the second year, when it goes up by 6% again, does it go up by 6% of the 250, or does it go up by 6% of the 265? Now, most of you will quickly say, that's a kind of an obvious answer. It actually will go up by 6% of the 265,000. That's why we call it compounding interest. You're not just earning interest on the amount that you originally invested in the house, you're also earning interest each year, or earning value or increased appreciation in the home of not only the original price, but also what it's grown to at that point in time. We call that compound interest, and here's how it works. Here's the first year, $265,000. The second year, $280,000. You watch, we don't do this. We don't go through every one of those years just as slowly as we have those first. In fact, we quickly get out to the point where we can simply say this. If you own a home, if you bought a home that's worth $250,000 today, and you held on to that home for 45 years, the value of your home would be worth $3.5 million. You say, what happened to that 2.5? Remember, we were going on that thing based upon a 40-year period of time. We asked, what would it be worth 40 years from now? And there's that number that we used, $2.5 million right there. I hope that you have some sense of why compounding interest is, to those of us who are very mathematically enthusiastic, a very exciting principle. Let me give you somebody that was very, very tuned in to just how exciting that principle was. Most of you have heard about a guy named Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein, these are quotes. We have a lot of confidence that they're absolutely quotes that Albert Einstein said, because you can find these on the internet. And I do that teasingly, but I can show you where we find those. Let me just show you some things that Albert Einstein, it's reported that he said during his lifetime. He said this: there's no greater power known to mankind than compounding interest. He also said compounding interest is the greatest mathematical discovery of all time. Compounding is the eighth wonder of the world, but here's my very favorite one. He said compounding is mankind's greatest invention because it allows for what? The reliable, systematic accumulation of wealth. The reliable, systematic accumulation of wealth. Can I just emphasize that time and time again? The reliable, systematic accumulation. I'm going to show you prophetically and scripturally and in every other way that we can possibly be taught that somehow that seems to be baked into the DNA of becoming more prosperous, that we also have a very strong plan of what it takes to do this systematically and not rush it too fast in what is in most cases to our obvious detriment. And once again, I just tell you this, I just have to emphasize that there's, and I've given those to you so you can back up and you can pause right now at any point and just look exactly where you can find each one of those quotes on the internet so you can go back and refresh your memory as to what he said about that. So what I want to do is this. We gave some broad parameters, didn't we, about what that number has to be. We gave some very broad parameters, what the financial assets have got to be worth by the time that we retire. And we want to make sure now that we give a very specific number. So all I've done is laid out ages. There's ages right here. And based upon those ages, then I want to lay out how many years you have till your point of choice. I should do it quite quickly so we know. And so now watch. This is very important. Because if you are indeed 60 today and you want to be done in 5 years, then this number will be very important to you right here. But what if you're 40? What if you're 40 years old and you want to be done in 5 years? Guess what? You can go right there to that 5-year number right there. So you can adjust this to anything that you need to, whether you do it based upon your age or whether you do it by the number of years that you have before retirement. You'll now know a number that will be our preliminary goal to make sure that you can accomplish the objective. Here's the income. Remember, we told you how much income you'd have to purchase that $50,000 basket of goods and services. There's the income in each one that'll start at, and here's indeed the point of choice assets. This will be a time. If you're real smart, if I were you, I'd probably kind of shut this thing down for a second and just kind of make sure that you not only write down the number that fits your circumstance, determine which number it is, write it down, and then ponder for just a second what it will take. Is it possible? Of course, that's the part we're going to show you right now that's so very possible. You pick the time frame. The most important one is how many years do you want to have before you reach your point of choice. So you pick however years it is that you have before your point of choice, and then you find out what that number is, that point of choice asset is, and make sure you write that down. Can I just tell you, there's something in behavioral anything that would suggest that once the number is absorbed, once it's understood, and then written down on a piece of paper, and at least moderately, if not carefully considered or pondered, it will help sink it into the DNA that will help you to accomplish this objective long term. So I'd highly recommend that you get there. Some people always ask me this question, could you just point out this? You're telling us what it needs to be by then. We've been out there for a little time. We've been actually working at this ourselves for a little bit, and we'd like to know how we're doing. And so if you'd like to reach that objective we just started off with, you'd like to have $50,000 a year income, and that income's going to make sure that I can have it every single, or at least buy that basket of goods and services we've talked about. Where should you be today? It's a kind of a fun number. I'm not going to try to tell you in any way that this is some kind of a absolute scientifically verifiable, no questions asked number, but at least gives you a target of what you should be at. So if you're 40 years old today, your financial assets should be today worth $245,000 if you're on track to reach that objective that we talked about. Some of you will look at that and say, not a chance. Just keep coming with me. I think we can show you a lot of things that will help you a lot. First of all, we're going to go back to that home, because now we're going to start building that formula to make sure that the number's enough. We're going to go back to that home value. We just gave you that thing that said if you're 20 years old today, that home will be worth $3.5 million. Let me give the other numbers. So if you're 30 years old, it'll be worth $2 million when you retire. If you're 40 years old, it'll be worth 1.5. If you're 50, $600,000. If you're 60 today and you're buying a home for $250,000, then it'll be worth $350,000. Now, so that's got that. Now listen to the guy that's 20 and even the guy that's 30. Really, the guy's 40. You can see where that's kind of a nice step towards those big numbers that we talked about. So we want to show you. We want to make sure that we not only intellectually and academically show you how to make this thing work, we want to make sure that visually you have some picture in your mind about how this thing is supposed to take place. And so we're going to create a little chart for you. We're going to just kind of have a little calculator, and in our calculator, we're going to build it this way. Now watch, you got to kind of absorb this because you're going to see this a lot as we go through the rest of this class. You're going to see that here's our 20-year-old right here. Here's our 30-year-old, our 40-year-old, and our 50 and our 60. We've then created this little column that suggests what will those numbers have to be worth. And I'm even going to build those numbers in for you right now. There's that 7.3 that we had to have if we're 20, the 4.9 if we're 30, the 3.3 if we're 40, and so on. So it kind of just see we want to make sure that we can hit our goal. We're going to give you a number of different variables or a number of different possibilities of strategies that you can utilize for this. But for right now, we're going to say, what if I did what I was asked to do will happen to this chart based upon that decision to own a home. And we're not only going to keep track of it based upon what the goal is, but we're going to also keep track. We're going to have some boxes at the top of it that will keep track in each column how much have we accomplished toward that objective if we select that strategy. And here we go. Here's our home. Our home, if we then said, okay, this is our home in yellow. You can see that in yellow. Everything that's in yellow right here, that'll be the value of the home by the time we get there. Now, I'm going to teach you later on some ways that you can actually turn your home into a retirement asset. It is my belief that many of you will look at it when we get there and look at how you do turn it into a retirement asset and say, I don't know that that's exactly what I want to do. Keep coming with me. I'm going to show you how to accomplish this whole objective if you did not want to count the home towards it. But I'm highly recommending that you build that into part of your portfolio and make sure that you make the home a critical part of it. And that's why we'll simply just say that our first critical step towards this very fundamental goal that we're talking about is something that you're probably either already doing or something you've imagined yourself doing and something that you will be doing before very long. It's simply purchasing a home. It's a great financial asset. It goes up in value. There are times where it can go down in value, but anybody that's been around for a long time knows that the value of a home long term just seems to work out the way that it's supposed to. Let's do our next step of the process. We then have in our formula that follows the H, is just this fundamental thing. It's an X. What's an X? An X in Roman numerals stands for 10. And as soon as I use the number 10 in personal finance, what would you think we're going to talk about? In this case, what we're going to do is talk about something that's simply referred to as a 401k, and we're going to suggest that you put 10% of your income into the 401k that you have at work. I want you to know that we have strong confidence. I wish I could just show you. Well, let me see if I can give you kind of a basic picture right now. When we did our research back in 1990 for the Novell Company, back in 89, 90, we found that if you took all the financial assets that were out there at that point in time, you added them all up, and you contrasted that number with the amount of money that was currently being held in qualified retirement plans. That's like a 401k or an IRA or a defined benefit pension plan at work or something like that. We'll talk so much more about those in the future. So for right now, just hold on to the general thought. If you take all the money that's currently invested in qualified retirement plans and contrasted it with all the money that's invested in everything else, those two are about the same. Isn't it interesting that of all the other investments that have ever meant anything to someone in their retirement, we're going to talk now about the one that is as big as all of the others combined. It is your 401k at work. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about a 401k and why a 401k works so well. Our first question is very fundamental. What is a 401k? There's some research. There was a program that I did for BYU at one point in time that you can find on the internet where we talked a lot about what the 401k is and why it works so well. I'd highly encourage you to go there and watch it. There's some insights I think will help that are even beyond the very simple things that we'll teach right now in class. But in that workshop, I think you'll find some things that will make it so that you'd be even more motivated to engage in the activity. But what I want to do more than anything is just ask this fundamental question, what is a 401k? So a lot of people, now if you've been out there working for a company, you know what a 401k is. You might not know enough about what it is that you've decided to engage the way that you should, but if you've never worked for a company, you're still asking yourself, but you got to kind of explain to me what a 401k is. Let me just give you these kind of general parameters. Number one, it's set up by your employer. Number two, you can make an investment contribution with the income that is being withheld from your paycheck. So you make an election when you first go to work for that company. Just say, look, I'd like to let 10% of my income go into this investment account on an ongoing basis. It's a contribution that often is matched by the employer. Now, why do they match? Students always ask, why would they ever want to pay you to put money into your 401k? Believe it or not, there's a lot of companies, a lot of employers that actually want you to stay around for a long time. They want to give you what we'll refer to as employee benefits. A benefit is anything that will make it so that you're far more likely to stay with the company and engage with the company on an ongoing basis, so they like to give you incentives. So a lot of companies, not all companies, a lot of companies will match the contribution that you make to the plan. So that, as an example, if you put in 4%, we'll match it with 4%. Now, you're never going to put in just 4% once you've heard this lecture. You're going to always kind of use that target that we've talked about, the 10%. But for right now, if you put 4% in, they'll match it 100%. So if you put in $2,000 this year, they'll match it $2,000. Now, kind of, you just got to take a dream with me for a second and say that means that I get 100% return on my money the second I put that money into. That's a great return on your investment to have that inside of a 401k plan. There will be several investment options available with the 401k. Here's the kind of fun thing: the tax, the federal income tax, and the state income tax that you have to pay on your income right now. If you make this great election to put that into your 401k, there'll be no tax paid on that contribution as you're putting the money in. The tax is only paid on it as you pull the money out. We'll talk a lot about that in the future. That should not stop you from considering this. We feel very strongly that the benefits associated with the 401k plan vastly outweigh some of the concerns that you may have about what might happen with a future that is at this point very uncertain. This is stick with stuff that we know makes a big deal. It makes a lot of sense to us right now. The last thing is that the tax. And I said that wrong. I said the no tax will be paid on the annual income that you drive inside the 401k. And then the last thing is that you'll have to pay the taxes on the distributions that you pull out of that. Why are they advantaged? What is the advantage? What's the major the behavioral advantage of these things? And we always say that it's in three fundamental things. Number one, if you don't see the money, you won't miss it. There are parts in my conversation where I know that as you see it on the board and you just accept it academically, you lose the thrill of engaging emotionally and understanding the enlightenment that comes from a very simple principle. And there's a Library of Congress research, that depth of research that's gone into knowing this. If you allow yourself from the very beginning to have something pulled out of your paycheck before you see it, there's a vast possibility that you'll never miss it. It's the coolest thing. If you allow it to get into your checking account first, then you say, well, by the end of the year, by the end of the month, I'll put in whatever's left over. I'll put into my investment account whatever's left over. The behavioral difference is stunning. The actual difference of what it will mean long term is stunning. I want you to hopefully absorb as we go through it the significance of simply saying, if I let that come out of my income before I see it, if I let it come out of my paycheck before I ever see it, I won't miss it. When I was at Novell, I did some research and I asked him to write on a piece of paper what amount was pulled out last month for your 401k, what amount was pulled out for federal income tax, what amount. None of them could tell me what that was. It was like 95% of them could not tell me within $40 what that was. But then when I said, can you tell me what the net amount was on your last paycheck? It completely reversed. So that after all those deductions, just tell me what the net amount was. Like 95% of them could tell me within $10 what that amount was. Why? Because when you get your paycheck, what do you look at? You look at that bottom line number. And that's what you begin to build your life around and plan your life around. And that's what we say life simply costs. That and, of course, whatever balance there is on your MasterCard at any point in time, that's what my life costs at that point. So here's the first major principle. If you don't see that money, you won't miss it. That's a cool thing. The second thing is this. There's a behavioral penalty. There's a substantial penalty for early withdrawal. So in an IRA or a 401k, we'll say something like this. Number one, if you do pull the money out before you retire, then you have to pay a 10% early liquidation penalty. That's the penalty. And we Americans hate penalties. And so we'll do whatever we can to avoid that penalty. So we want to just make sure that we avoid the penalty. And so we'll leave the money in there. So something comes up, a kid's need braces, our engine blows up in the car, whatever it is that I need to have, I just choose to not look at my 401k. I just figure that out of other resources. And it's because we know that there's going to be a penalty for that. My last one is probably my favorite one of all of them. And that's just this. We can actually have someone else do all the work for us. I want you to think, when it comes to losing weight, can you delegate that responsibility to someone else? When it comes to increase and making sure these investments are made, making sure that the income is pulled out of your paycheck, making sure that it's kept track of on an ongoing basis, make sure that everything is taken care of for you, can you delegate that responsibility to someone else? And the answer is clearly yes. Today, when you go to work for a company, you simply have to find the box that says, yeah, I'd like to contribute to a 401k. I'd like to do that. Fortunately, now I got to tell you, we'll talk about this later on in some lectures. We found that if that's the default option. So see, it used to be you had to sign up for the 401k. You had to actually take a proactive, meaningful step to sign up for the 401k. A lot of companies have now adopted a plan where instead of signing up to participate, you sign up if you don't want to participate. You actually have to check the box that says, I don't want to participate in that. So if you just make it so that you're going to participate unless you take an active, proactive step to not participate, we find that the participation in 401ks goes from about 35% of the employees that start off with the company will sign up for the plan if they have to sign up for the plan, if they have to sign up for the 401k. It goes up to nearly 90% if it's the default option. You're just involved in the 401k if you don't tell us you don't want to be. Ugh. But now think about it. You can't delegate that responsibility to lose weight to someone else. But to take what you'll quickly see is the most important financial step that you'll ever take in your life. You can literally check a couple of boxes, and the smartest thing that you can ever do is forget that you ever even were given the choice. Put away the statements and just find new ways to put more money in on an ongoing basis. It'd be the smartest single thing that you've ever done. So as you do that, I'll just tell you this. This will become, the vast majority of all cases, this will be the largest single liquid investment you'll ever have in your retirement. Nothing else will ever come close. And so what we want to do is just contribute 10%. That's once again where the X comes from. We're going to do 10% of our income that we're going to contribute to our 401k. And that's ultimately one of the most powerful steps you can imagine. I'm going to show you right now graphically why that is indeed the case. And so if I took a 401k, and I'm going to do the kind of the short term first, then I'll do the long term. Let's just kind of consider for how long this takes to build up. Here's the assumptions that I built into it. I'd go through all my assumptions. They're very reasonable assumptions based upon what the investment markets have ever accumulated in the past, based on what the growth in pay the people receive on an ongoing basis. Let's just start this thing off when they're 20 years old, and I'll just tell you this. You have to kind of take a deep breath, because I know when you first see the number, it doesn't seem to add up the way that you thought that it would. Literally, with those numbers, 5% increase in pay on an ongoing basis, beginning income of $50,000. Remember, this is for anybody. This is not for some guy that's a massive, kind of a key executive, a big company or anything like that. It's $50,000 you start off with. Your contributions are going to be 10%. Your employer match is going to be 4%. And the investment yield that we have is 11%. Actually, the investment yield in a high, well-qualified, well-diversified, well-allocated investment account has been higher than that over the last 80 years. For right now, take a deep breath. And just know that if you'll do that, a 20-year-old will have $17 million in his 401k plan by the time he reaches age 65. Now remember, we started this whole thing off by saying that number's too big for me. When I told my 20-year-olds you had to have $7.3 million in your 401k, it seemed like a number way beyond our comprehension or our believable, achievable barometer. Could we really ever do that? Then we said, but if you only want to have a $100,000 basket of goods and services, we immediately went to something that said, if instead of 7.3 million, we shot that thing up to 14.6 million. Can you imagine that in one decision that anybody has working for a company today, in one simple decision, And even if you don't work for a company, we'll give you lots of ideas. If you don't work for a company that sponsors one of these kind of plans, we'll give you all that later on. What if you actually made the decision? We'll show you how it all works and what goes on in the process. I'll just tell you this: that number, by the time you reach by the time you reach age 65, would have accomplished the entire objective. We could quit class. We could halt everything we're doing right now and just ask everybody, you want to plant that on your forehead as the most important thing you'll ever do, and stick by that plan regardless all the other options that people extend to you over the time that you're working. If you'd stick to one plan, and that is just put money into your 401k, it would accomplish the objective. Here's our other numbers. The 30-year-old would have $5.5 million. A 40-year-old would have $1.7 million. A 50-year-old would have $450,000. And our 60-year-old, even our 60-year-old, would have $70,000. Sitting in his 401k, if they started right now doing this, by the time they reach age 65, they'd have $70,000 sitting in their 401k. Now remember, for our 60-year-old, we're assuming numbers where you've not done anything in the past. This whole program is this. We're just saying you've not done one dang thing in the past. We're going to still get you ready for retirement by the way we do. And wait till you see the numbers. I think you'll be very pleased. So what we're going to do, we're going to remember how we did our little chart. We're going to put that chart back up on the screen. We're going to say, look, we did a little too fast. I want to make sure you're familiarized with what it is. There's our number. That was just using and finding out how much the home would be worth relative to each one of those numbers. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add to it our 401k, and our 401k makes it so that literally our 20-year-old has a $20 million net worth by the time they reach age 65, with a home and a 401k where they're putting 10% away on an ongoing basis. That's it. That's all they'd have to do. Our 30-year-old, that's all they'd have to do. Our 40-year-olds, not quite up to where they need to be yet. They're still at the 3 point, instead of 3.3, they're at 2.8. You can see that's where we're calculating our numbers. Our 50-year-olds got some work to do. They need 2.3. They'd only have 1 million at that time. And our 60-year-old that needs 1.5 would only have $420,000. But we're still coming. The next thing we want to talk about, the next thing we want to build into our formula is this very fundamental concept, and it's one that was a surprise to us. And before I start talking about it, I want to remind you what our original objective was. What are the things that we can document to you that people have done very well behaviorally over time? And so, now remember, if I'm going to look at behavioral, I want to set this thing up, and I'm going to find something that we had never imagined as part of this process, but was linked into what we did in what was a very popular way with our students there at Novell. Let me just ask you this simple question. How are we doing with our debt payments today? So you didn't think you're going to talk about debt payments as kind of a proactive part of this building or wealth accumulation or prosperity building project. We just talk about debts in America today. Unfortunately, the average American household today has $2,300 a month in debt payments. So $2,300 a month. Now that's including the house payment. So everything, whether it's a mortgage payment, whether it's a student loan payment, whether it's a Visa card payment, whatever it is that we have to pay on an ongoing basis, what we're going to do is make it so that we have $2,300 a month that we have to pay. When we have to pay that, whatever it is, how well are we doing at that? So then I asked, and first of all, I just have to tell you there's been a 300% increase in per capita debt over the past 30 years. And when I tell you that, now let me just ask you the big question, though. And I want you to kind of formulate for yourself an answer to this as we go through it. What if I took every single person that had a debt payment in America today, took all the Americans, we took every single one that has any kind of a debt payment, we asked this very fundamental question: what percentage of all those people are more than 30 days behind on any single one of those payments? So you got a house payment, you got a mortgage payment, there's a mortgage payment, you got a mortgage, a MasterCard payment, you've got a Visa payment, you got a car payment, you got a student loan payment, something like that. What percentage of all of Americans are more than 30 days behind on any single one of those? I will just tell you this, my guesses are always, I'll bet you in your own mind you've guessed something like, 50%, 60%, 70%. Most people will guess a very high number. The actual number is only 4.2% of all people are more than 30 days behind on any single one of those debt payments. That's kind of fun. I will tell you this, whenever I teach bankers or those who work in the financial services industry where they're working with payments, I ask this, and they say, that's right, that's my aging receivables. That's my 30 days aging receivables, about 4.2% or 3% or something like that, they'll say. We hear a lot about those that are behind on their payments. The news will tell us all the time about how devastating it is and how that number is growing on an ongoing basis. I would just like to just throw this out as a consideration. What if you knew that literally only 4.2% of all people are behind on any single one of the payments? What does that mean? Now, for those who are behind, there's a remedial class. We'll talk to you about that later. But for right now, what would it mean if you knew that 96% of all people that have any kind of a debt payment in America today are on time with that payment? Whew. Now, think for a second why we came up with this. What we're looking for is something that we do on an ongoing basis as Americans that we're behaviorally very efficient at doing. Can you see why we came up with these debt payments? $2,300 a month. Every single month, you work your knuckles to the bone, you work extra time, you have all sorts of opportunities. Whatever it takes to come up with the money necessary, you come up with $2,300, you pull that money out of your pocket and hand that to someone else. Do you see the behavior? Do you see why that's of significance, or why it is of such value? All just do is this then. I'd like to change the goal. So instead of just staying in debt with these creditors, I'd like you to just say this: can I change who gets the payment to yourself? I'd like you to be the one that gets that $2,300 a month payment. So just keep it. Pull the $2,300 out of one pocket and put it right back in the other pocket. Now, there is a caveat, and that is you might want to pay off the creditor before you do this. It can create a lot of problems if the creditor does not get their money. So we'd like to invite you to pay off the creditor first, and we want to show you the most efficient way of doing that. We're going to set this up as our first number one. So we have the H, purchase a home. We have the X, contribute 10% to your 401k. What we want to do as our first number one is this. We, in a program that we call Debt, You Owe It to Yourself, would like to make this recommendation. You have the minimum payments that you're paying towards your debt payments right now. What I'd like you to do is just add to those minimum debt payments 1% of your annual income. Now, why do you have to add some money to this? I think it's very important. I hope that you see why. I want to make sure you understand. Why do you have to pay more? We found out that the average MasterCard in America today, if you pay it off based upon what the creditor tells you have to pay, you get that little statement. It has a little minimum monthly payment on it. You do exactly what you're asked to do, and you make exactly the payment that they tell you to make. It will take you nearly 34 years to pay off that credit card if you do exactly what you're told from that lender. We kind of facetiously add this. Each year in November, you get this letter that says, hey, you owe this money to us, and it's Christmas time. The last thing you wanted to be doing at Christmas time is to making a silly payment. Why don't you take a payment holiday on us? We'll consider that our Christmas payment from us to you. Just don't make us a payment next month. And of course, inevitably, there's somebody in the audience that will raise their hand and say, well, now, will the creditor keep charging interest during that time? And everyone here will say, they'll absolutely do that. So let me ask you this question. What if during that 34 years, the 34 years it takes to pay off that MasterCard, what if you just skip one payment each year? So you make the other 11 payments on time, just like you're supposed to make those payments, and you skip one payment. Literally, that will add nearly 33 years to your debt reduction chart. It will literally take you 77 years before you've paid off that MasterCard. Can you see why we have to add more money than what the creditor had assumed that we would pay, or the creditor tells us we should pay based upon our minimum monthly payments? We want to kind of take control of this. We want to take charge of it. We want to do it in a way, and I'm going to give you a neat blessing that will come as you do that. So let's just do our 1% of annual income. Let's assume, so we take our annual income, we divide it by 12. Here's a hypothetical circumstance. Let's just say it's $48,000 a year that we make. 1% of $48,000 is $480. If we divide that $480 by 12, we come up with $40. Here's what we do. We take the minimum monthly payments that we're already paying to all of our debts, and we add to the smallest payment $40. That'll make it pay off faster. It won't be 77 years till you pay it off. It'll be a much shorter period of time, and wait till we show you just how much shorter period of time it's going to be. The third thing is that we do is this. As we add that to the payment, so we add that $40 to that first payment, and once that thing is paid off, what do? We take the money that we were paying towards that first payment, and just roll that into our next debt payment each month. I'm going to show you a real world example here in just a second. But from right now, do you see why we call it a roll up? We just take the money that we paid towards the first one. Once it's paid off, we pay that towards the next one. Once that was paid off, we take all that money and pay it towards the next one, and then the next one and the next one. There's a very simple thing that will happen, but I'll tell you this, it's exciting. Here's my question to you. Our research and the research of many others has said this. The average American that is willing to accept that challenge and pay their debt payments just like we just talked about, the average American will be completely out of debt. And I want you to know this includes the home mortgage. You'll be out of debt in just about 6 to 8 years. That's all the time that it will take. Now, that assumes that you've got some debt payments that you're already making. Somebody will quickly raise their hand and say, I only have a mortgage payment. How long will that take? Guess what? In our class, we're going to show you. So make sure that you have the exact number. But imagine. So this is one of those times you might want to shut off the machine and just kind of absorb that. And just for yourself say, is that possible? Really, within 6 to 8 years, I could be completely free of debt. Can't tell you how many students I've had at the BYU that have gone out of class and just said, look, we've been living like, living this very kind of a very, very sacrificial type life for such a long time, living on very little. Once we get out and we start making the kind of money we make when we first get out of school, we'll just keep living this way. I've had a lot of them within 6 to 8 years are completely out of all debt. They own their home, and they're well on their way to accomplishing something of real significance financially. How does it work? There was a great book written. Some of you will recognize the name Marvin Ashton. In Marvin Ashton, I don't know, maybe you can see that better if I stand over here with that, but Marvin Ashton wrote a book called One for the Money. It wasn't actually a book when it was first written. It was just a talk that he gave. And Spencer W. Kimball loved that talk so much, he said every member of the church ought to have that talk. So it was turned into this book called One for the Money. And the book, you could pick it up at the distribution center. Well, they finally figured out it might be a good idea once we had the internet, to just make it available on the internet. You can go to providentliving.com today, and you'll see that book sitting right there. You can get a copy of it for yourself. It's a great little talk, and here's what Marvin Ashton did. Elder Ashton said this. Here's a little debt elimination calendar. This is the one that actually appears in the book so that you can see it. Here's a credit card, a furniture debt that you have, a dentist, a physician, an automobile loan. He just said this. Let's just assume you take that credit card payment of $110. Now, in our case, this would have been $70. We've just added the $40 to it. So we got $110 we make for the first 4 months. And his assumption was that within that 4-month period of time, you'll have paid off that debt. Once you pay off the debt, now watch this. This is the most important thing. You took that $110, and what happens? Here's this furniture debt that you've been paying that's $70 a month. You take that $110, add it to the $70, and you're paying $180 every month until that one pays off. Then you take the $180 and add that to what you've been paying to the dentist, to $50, so you're paying $230 to him each month. It's critical for you to see. A lot of people will ask me, does it mean you have to add $40 more every time something pays off? No, you do that $40 one time when you're paying towards this payment right here. These other debts accelerate their payment based upon then taking all the money that you're paying towards the first debt and just adding it to the next one and showing how it works. So I thought I'd give you a real world example. My wife and I, some years ago, it was back in 1991. You can't see it, I'm sure, on your thing, but that says November of 1991 right there. I went to my wife with this chart. We had a little music studio, and we'd incurred some debts on some equipment that we were using in the music studio. And so our debts were, these were all the debts that we had at the time. And this is not the actual chart I took to her because, of course, we didn't have the computer that we could set up like this quite as fancy as I did here. So I took a piece of graph paper. And on the graph paper, I took this to her, and I said, look, here's the way it works. I took every single one of our payments, took who we owed it to, and we said, here's what the minimum payment is right here. And then we took, in this case, we were going to assume $48. That's what I was going to add to it. I was going to add $48. And then when that paid off, we just take it and put it towards the next one and the next one, whatever. And we pay that thing down. And then we set up this thing. Now, in order to make it so it's a little bit bigger for you, maybe on the screen, I've kind of divided the chart in two. But I will say that when I first took that to my wife, she looked at the bottom line, which was the mortgage, and she said, man, that's a long line. I said, that is a long line, but if we don't do it this way, that line would go down the hall and into the bathroom. She went, okay, I buy in. I see what you're saying. And so we made a little deal. Here was our deal. My wife got to make all the payments as long as I got to color in the boxes because we put that chart on our bedroom wall. My wife will say I became obsessed with our accelerated debt reduction payment chart. I like to say that I became eternally enlightened by the opportunity of engaging in something so positive with someone that I love so dearly. And she kind of didn't think that sounded very good either, but just know this. Here's the way it was done. So each month as we make the payment, you can kind of see where I did this. I knew that those two were going to pay off real quickly, and I wanted to lock us into a pattern where indeed once those were paid off, we just paid it towards the next debt. And somebody will always ask me, Brother Morris, what's the different colors in the boxes? It's whatever color pencil I could find when it came time to marking the boxes on any given day. But I'll tell you, my wife will tell you that there's more than one time she caught me standing in front of my debt reduction chart weeping. Those who know me, it was not weeping tears of sorrow or frustration. They were tears of gratitude to think that there's such an important vision of what we were trying to accomplish. And what it did was it showed that there's November of 1991 that when we started off. Here's January of 1998 when it was scheduled to be paid off. So it was almost exactly 6 years. Boy, when my wife saw that and we had the opportunity to engage ourselves in a process like this, we both got very excited. And I'll guarantee you, we did not have the financial resources at the time that made it so that it was an easy process. We knew that there would be some sacrifice. I will tell you, as time went on, and now after it's been over, we felt like there was no sacrifice in it at all. It was just a delightful process. So nevertheless, we'd go and we just did. Now, somebody asked me too, what happens with these black boxes? I'm going to tell you something kind of fun. In the Doctrine and Covenants, in the 104th section of the Doctrine and Covenants, is to pay your debts. It's a very common thing, pay your debts. That's a good thing to do. Then verses 78 through 80, it says to pay your debts. It then gives you 3 strategies for getting out of debt. It says you have to be prayerful, you have to be humble, and you have to be diligent. I like those. They're good. Prayerful, humble, and diligent. Not kind of, I'll tell you a lot later about accelerated debt reduction things that require you borrow money against your house to pay off all your other debts, and show you why that can be so harmful and so destructive behaviorally. Just says you have to be prayerful, you have to be humble, and you have to be diligent. But then the Lord promises us 2 things. He said, I'll soften the hearts of those to whom you're in debt until I send the means necessary for your deliverance. Whew. Now kind of catch that for a second. Soften the hearts of those to whom you're in debt. For those of you who have ever had one of those phone calls from somebody where you're overdue or whatever, you can know what that could mean. The second one was, until I send means necessary for your deliverance. Now, what does he mean by means? I don't know. Does it mean manna from heaven? I don't know. Does it mean a better relationship with your wife? It could be. I can tell you a couple of times during this process, my wife came to me one time and said, Scott, I've been doing some research on our automobile insurance, and I found that we could save $30 a month on our automobile insurance. She said, I'll fill out all the paperwork. I'll take care of all the steps that are necessary. I'll take care of all the details as long as you'll promise me one thing. You have to promise me that if we're saving that $30 a month, that we'll add that $30 to our accelerated debt reduction payment. How's that for a marital conversation about finance? I kind of imagine having one of those conversations where you're both looking at each other. Of course, I'm just thrilled to think that that's a possibility. And she's looking at me and saying, I want to make sure that that happens. Instead of being some way to spend our money, she was trying to figure out better ways to accelerate this process. I'll tell you another time she came to me and there was some silverware that my mother-in-law had given her for our wedding. And it was real silver stuff. Well, I don't know how you do the whole thing, but it was a very valuable thing of silver. And it sat underneath our bed. And she came to me as part of this during this time and said, Scott, why don't we sell the silver? And we don't ever use it. That's just not something that's kind of an essential component of our lives. Let's just sell the silver, and we'll sell the silver, and we'll use that as a payment towards our accelerated debt reduction. I like to laugh with the students and just say this, knowing who I am, is that silverware still under the bed, or is it sold off? And they all raise their hands and say, it must have been sold off. And I say, I'm not that dumb. I might look dumb, but I'm not that. I said that silverware still sitting there. We did not make that decision. I just want you to kind of capture that as part of this fun process of not just doing smart things, but enjoying it and actually seeing yourself make better decisions all the time. There's a great scripture in the 111th section of the Doctrine and Covenants, verse 11. This is about paying off debts too. This is a great section about paying off debts. The prophet Joseph found that there's a bunch of money in Salem, Massachusetts, or there was wealth that he could go there to get. He took some of the brethren and off they shot for Salem, Massachusetts to get this wealth. Joseph Smith said this, my intended objective with that money was to pay off all of the church's debts. Kind of cool, huh? So this is kind of an opportunity for a prophet of God to follow a path that would accomplish what to most of us would have seemed like an eternally profound objective of paying off all the church's debts. But most of us know what happened when they got there. The money was not there. I'd like you to read it. It's short, crud. It's only that long, and probably could read it in about 2.4 minutes or something like that. That's how long it would take to read it. But I want you to see what the Lord said to Joseph and the brethren after they'd found out there was no money. He said, why do you concern yourself with this stuff? Go look at it for yourself. Why do you fear? Why do you concern yourself so much of that? And then if you can't read the whole section, you read the last verse. And how's this for a scripture verse that you can remember the number real easy? It's in the 111th section of the Doctrine and Covenants, verse 11. So 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Doctrine and Covenants 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. You look at what he said. He said, if you'll be wise as serpents, I interpret that in today's language, be smart. If you'll be wise as serpents and yet without sin, be obedient. Be smart, be obedient. He said, I'll order all blessings in your behalf. Now catch this. I'll order them. I'll actually create a plan whereby those blessings will be fulfilled. He said this, as fast as you're able to receive them. And shut off your system again. Read that verse. Consider for yourself this possibility. He wants us out of debt so much. He wanted the prophet out of debt. But he wanted to do it based upon that verse that he said back in the 104th section. We do it with wisdom, and we do it with discipline. We do it with humility. We do it with prayer. We do it with the understanding that indeed we can be blessed a great deal by a Heavenly Father that loves us dearly and wants to make sure that we get out of debt. Imagine what that meant to the prophet when he read that. Imagine what it could mean to you. Before you go to sleep tonight, you imagine what it means to feel like the prophet could indeed, and that the Lord could indeed bless you with the things that we're talking about, if indeed you're willing to follow this very simple formula that we've discussed. So watch what happens as we do this. I wanted to tell you what happened to this debt right here. It was after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months into the process. 6 months into the process, I got a phone call. This individual said, you've got a debt to us. It doesn't show the actual balance here. It was about $7,200, something like that. So you've got a debt to us about $7,200. And of course, we've been paying up for 6 months. So I think the debt had been paid down to about $6,900 or $7,000, somewhere around there. The individual said this, we've got some auditors coming, and we need to get some of the debts off our books. I don't know why. That was just what he explained to me as he did it. He said, we need to get some of these debts off our books. So I said, I'll tell you this. If you could come up with a check for $2,000 and send that check to us today, we'll forgive all of the rest of the debt. He had no idea who he said that to. I mean, please tell me what your name is. Tell me the address that I'd send it to. How would I take care of this? And so I gave you the address and where to send it and what his name was, whatever. I joyfully got off the phone, told my wife, I said, we got the opportunity to pay this whole thing off. All we're going to do is send him $2,000. She said, where are you going to come up with $2,000? We don't have that kind of money. What I did in order to come up with that money is what he had suggested to me. I thought of others that owed me money. And I called them and I said, hey, if you could pay me X amount today, then I could forgive you anything else that's beyond that amount. Sure enough, it worked just as efficiently with them as it had with me. And by the end of the day, I sent away that check for $2,000. Literally, just in that short a period of time, they forgave all the rest of that debt. Now, can you see why this thing, and that's why the black box comes into here. What happens is, because that whole thing had been paid off, the money, the $300 a month that I'd been paying towards that debt, got rolled back up here. And you can see why those two got paid off very quickly in the next month because of that extra money I was paying towards it. So it was just a fun, I'm sure you can see what happened in the process. And you can see that every time it turns into a black line, that's when the debt paid off faster than what we had anticipated it paying off. And you can quickly see, instead of taking 6 years to pay this off, we paid off everything in about 4 years. And it was in October of 1995, we made our last payment towards our debts. And now what's the goal? And that's what a lot of people have not seen in the whole thing so far. The goal is to make it so that instead of giving that money to someone else, giving that $2,300 a month to someone else, we just take it out of one pocket and we put it back in our investment pocket so that it becomes a very significant contributing factor to the future that we hope to create for ourselves. Can I just tell you this so that you can have your own accelerated debt reduction chart if you want to? There's a place on the internet you can go to called powerpay.org. It's completely nonprofit making. It was set up by the Utah State University. It's free. Print out a debt reduction calendar that's surprisingly similar to that one that Elder Ashton had in his book, One for the Money. And here's what it looks like. So you go to the first page. You very carefully list whatever the debts are, what the balance is towards those debts, what the payment is that you're supposed to be paying me, what the interest rate is, and then it will immediately tell you how long it will take to pay off those debts if you just continue to pay them in the exact same way. But then by a simple click of the button, it'll create for you a chart that will do exactly what Elder Ashton suggested, and you can see what I mean by surprisingly similar look to it. It just makes it so that in the last month, whatever it is that you now do not have to pay, you put it towards the next one, and then you put that towards the next one, and it's very similar to it. And this one can include your mortgage so that your mortgage can be paid off very quickly also. It can be very significant to you. So we already did the home. We know what the home would be worth by the time we hit our point of choice. We then took the amount that we're paying towards our towards our 401k. We know what that can be worth. Now, what would happen if once we paid off our debts? So we've made an assumption in our charts that it takes you about 8 years to pay off all the debts. What if you did that? What if you accepted this challenge and made it so that by the time you had paid off those debts, you just took that money from one pocket and put it back into your own pocket? How much did that contribute towards your eventual point of choice value? And here's what it is. Our 20-year-old individual will have an extra $12,600,000 in his point of choice assets. Our 30-year-old will have 4.3. Our 40-year-old will have 1.3. Our 50, 350. Now, of course, if we assume that it's going to take 6 years to get out, 6 to 8 years to get completely out of debt, you can see why our 60-year-old will not have anything because they won't quite be out of debt when they come to that point in time. But look at those numbers. Now let's add those to that chart that we have that makes it so that we can visually see how powerful this can become. Here we are. This is the number this is where we finished off when we had our home and our 401k and the amount of money that we'd have in our accounts if we did those two things. Let's just add now to those balances what would be there if we paid off our debts and then continued to contribute what we were paying towards our debts to our retirement, and we jump up quite substantially. You know, I try to emphasize whenever I come to this number, is this class about numbers? Is it about getting fabulously wealthy? No. I want to emphasize with the strongest possible enthusiasm, this class is about potential. It's about knowing that we really have a lot more potential than what we ascribe to ourselves. I want you to think back through what we've suggested so far and to see if any of these things seem to be beyond your believable, achievable imagination. You're going to buy a home. You're going to buy a modest home. You're going to buy the average value of the home in America today. You're going to take 10% of your income on an ongoing basis and contribute to your 401k. You're going to add $40, or what will for the average American be about $40. You'll add about $40 a month to the payment that you're making to your creditors. Then you'll use that roll-up plan. By the time you've paid that, you've paid off all the debts, then you just can take that money and contribute it to your investment account. And what have you ended up with? Our 20-year-old has $33 million. Our 30-year-old has $12 million. Our 40-year-old, 4.1. Do you see why it's so significant? You can see that our 50-year-old, we still got some work to do, but we haven't talked about our last one yet. And our 60-year-old has quite a bit, but we're going to get you there. We're going to actually show you how this can happen for you. But I want you to take a deep breath and let me document for you something that's pretty significant. Now watch. There's our $33 million right now. What did we tell you in the beginning? You had to have 7.3. See that? So we told you had to have 7.3. But you're going to have 33. You're going to have 33 now. What income would that 7.3 purchase for us? Remember, it was $50,000. Watch, I'll show it to you. Here's your $33 million right here. So now you have $33 million in financial assets. And we originally told you had to have $7.3 million in financial assets in order to have a basket of goods and services for $50,000. Well, but if we have $33 million, what kind of a basket of goods and services would that qualify for us to be purchasing today? And the answer ends up being $226,000. That's kind of fun, isn't it? I hope there'd be one or two of you that would kind of like have an Albert Einstein moment at that point and shut off the computer and say, wow, I love compound interest because it provides for the systematic accumulation of wealth on a long-term basis just if you know the formula and you work the formula the way that you're supposed to work it, what can it mean to you? I think those numbers. Now remember, it's not about the number. It's about the potential that you have if you do this thing correctly. And it's about knowing that anybody can do it. You don't have to be a highly compensated executive or take a lot of risk. You for yourself say, can I imagine myself? Does that kind of fit into my believable, achievable complex? Can I actually imagine myself buying a home, contributing 10% to my 401k, and putting an extra 1% of my income towards my debts, and then living by that formula? Some people ask me this. I want to make sure you understand. Some people say, but does that tell you, Brother Marcy, you would never put any more money, I mean, you'd never take on any other debt? I want you to just know that I want you to go back to the chart that we originally started with, the debts that were actually there. And all I'm suggesting to you is you take those debts and you take those debt payments off in the way that we've described here. Does it assume that you'll never take out another debt? No, it doesn't. I think there's a chance that you might take out another debt or two in your life. And I want you to feel like and have the comfort of knowing that this is not about some kind of a straitjacket that somebody gets poured into, that they're going to live for the rest of their life in abject poverty because of the goals that they've established for themselves. I think you'll find that it's very comfortable to live within this formula, and it's the formula, it's the belief, and it's the long-term vision of what you'd be doing with your point of choice that ultimately creates the energy that's necessary to accomplish the task. Now, after we've done everything else, we come to our last one. The one refers to something that we refer to as million-dollar choices. I have to first tell you that our second class is entirely about million-dollar choices. So we're going to get into much more detail about what a million-dollar choice is, about what some of the potential million-dollar choices can be, about how gigantic of an impact it can mean in our future when we dedicate ourselves and remember what it's about to do these. But for right now, I'll just kind of give you a brief overview so you'll see how it fits into our picture. What is a million-dollar choice? A million-dollar choice ultimately is just a small choice. What is today a small choice? That as we make those choices, we create for ourselves lifetime options. And those lifetime options are created because we've not only made the choice today, but we continue to enjoy the benefits of making that choice over a long period of time, as we'll describe. And here's what we'd like to do as part of our consideration with these choices. And my question becomes, what if you made a choice each year that would allow you to save an additional 1% of your income in these investments that we've talked about? We do that through something that we in our classes refer to as life reserves. And of course, the reserve is an acronym, and an acronym stands for this. What we're trying to do is this. We're trying to find recurring expenses. So an expense that is replicated more than once. So I'm saving money on a phone bill. I'm saving money on a magazine subscription. I'm saving money on something else that I'm doing. If I could find those recurring expenses, why recurring? Because if we can find it one time, we can make the decision to change that expense or change that way that we're receiving income. Then we have it go into our 401k. Of course, that's what comes up. We're going to have recurring expenses that we choose not only to save, but we're going to, and here's the key indicator, is that we invest it. There's a lot of people that save money in a lot of different ways, but if you don't invest that in some way, if you just go spend it on something else, you saved money because you took in a coupon or you found some kind of a value discount that you qualified for, it's great to do those things, but unless you actually then take the money that you saved and invested it, and in this case, we want to save it in the right vehicle. And we're going to define as the right vehicle, the 401k. If we could do that, what we're asking is if we could do that once each year for 5 years. So our illustration here is just this, for the first 5 years. So this year we start off, hopefully you have the possibility of starting at the 10% that we've talked about with our 401k. And then we're going to then show you what would happen to that long-term value that we've calculated for you if you then each year found one of these million-dollar choices. And please suspend judgment. As you first hear it, you just think, wow, that sounds like a lot of money. But wait till you see how you can do this and how simple it can become to you. Here's what will happen. Here's our million-dollar choice. Here's the age. We've done this chart before. There's our assumptions, the exact same assumptions that we've made before. We just say this. Our 20-year-old, by simply making $1 million choice this year, Just so this year we find $1 million choice, and then each year for the next 5 years, we find a $1 million choice that we can add to our 401k income, a 401k balance. It will increase our point of choice assets by $4.5 million. Our 30-year-old, it would increase by 1.4. Our 40-year-old by 410,000. Our 50-year-old by $100,000, and our 60-year-old even $10,000 additional that it would put into our net worth by doing that. Let's see what it adds up to. Let's see what it does on our chart. Remembering, of course, for right now, there's a lot of questions you have about the $1 million choice. Let's just give it the chance to go through our second major section that we'll do with our classes, and then you'll know a lot more about what they are. Right now, look at what it does to our chart. Here is our chart after we've done our accelerated debt reduction. So all we've done so far is done we've purchased a home. We've done our 10% to our 401k. Then we've done our 1% to our accelerated debt reduction. Now we're going to add to it. So here's the chart that we had. Now we're going to add to it. What would it increase it if we did that 1% $1 million choice each year for 5 years? And you can see where now it makes the numbers look obviously very exciting. Our 20-year-old's got $37 million potential. Remember, I'm going to still continue to emphasize potential. It's not about the big number. It's just about all the huge potential that we have in this. Our 30-year-old would have $13 million by their point of choice. Our 40-year-old, $5 million. You can see how well it works. I got one more thing I want to talk about. I really would love to just pause and appreciate and enjoy what $1 million choice can mean to each one of you, and how easy it's going, how efficient it will be to make those $1 million choices once you know how to make them. And you know how the future is going to significantly decrease the expenses of many of the things that we're spending our money on right now. And we'll talk about that when we get a chance. I hope that you capture with imagination what it can mean to you. I want to add one more thing to our chart. As we started our lectures today, we asked ourselves this question, or we made this observation: we need to have assets worth $7.3 million. We did that because we said, if you could, as a 20-year-old, now you can type in there your own number, but as a 20-year-old, they had to have $7.3 million in assets. And we said, if you did that, that would generate for you income of $50,000, or what is today worth a basket of goods and services worth $50,000. So it would give you $50,000 today, of what it costs today for a $50,000 basket of goods and services for that number. Well, what's the problem? We've got two more obvious sources of income that in one case everyone qualifies for, and in the other case a lot of people qualify for, that when they make the promise to us, they'll make that promise as an income number. Here's an example. What if somebody came along and said, look, I'm going to pay you $30,000 a year when you retire, and that person just so happened to be the federal government that was going to provide you Social Security income, or it was your employer that said you're going to have pension income of $30,000 when you retire. Here's our magic leap. How can we take that $30,000 and translate that into an asset equivalent number so we can know how that will contribute to our point of choice required asset? We do that, for those of you who are mathematicians, through something that we refer to as the present value of a series of income payments. So here's what it is. See if you can kind of capture this. You'll get quickly confused if you've not been exposed to this before, so just try to understand the principle. What if somebody told me this? I'm going to give you $30,000 this year, and then next year I'm going to give you $30,000 plus 2.5% or whatever the cost of living adjustment is on Social Security. So let's just say they'll give me $32,000 next year, or $31,000. Then the year after that, they'll give me $32,000. The year after that, they'll give me $33,000. That's a big promise. How can I turn those promises of income into what you and I will refer to as an asset equivalent amount that I can add to my point of choice assets to see if indeed it will help significantly towards the retirement or the point of choice that I hope to have? Now, I'm going to caution you. This next part can get a little complex for those who don't understand it. So if you didn't understand all the complexity, that's okay. I just want you to understand the big picture, the concept or the principle of turning an income, a stated amount of income, into an asset equivalent amount. And here's how we're going to do it. So here's our pension plan or Social Security. Let's just call it Social Security right now because that's the one that I'm going to give you an illustration of. And I'm going to set up a little bank. And in my bank, I'm going to do this. Let's assume that each year somebody promises to pay you income. And in the first year, they promise to pay you, in our example, they're going to pay you $35,000 this year. Okay? And they say, I'll pay that to you next week. And you say, but I'd like you to secure that promise. And so I'd like you to put enough money in the bank to make sure that when next week comes, I have that money. How much would I have to put in the bank today at very low rates of interest to make it so that by the time we get to the end of this week, I can give you $35,000? Well, that's a pretty simple one. So we'll just say this. You got to take $35,000 today and put that in the bank to make sure that at the end of the week. So we call that securing the promise or guaranteeing the promise to put that amount of money in the bank. So let's just put that in the bank. Now let's say this. Let's say that it's Social Security and it's going to increase each year by 2.5%. That is, or that has been, what has been the average cost of living adjustment for Social Security over the last 60 years. So let's just assume that it happens again this year because they're trying to protect you from inflation. So let's assume that it's going to happen this year, and instead of giving you $35,000 in year 2, they're going to give you $35,875. Now, I hope that's understandable at that point. Now think about it. First year they gave you $35,000. The next year they're going to give you $35,875. But they say, we want you to secure that promise. So you say, well, but I could let that money grow in the bank each year, and we're going to assume that you get an 8% yield, which that doesn't happen in the bank today for sure. But we're just going to assume the number so it kind of gives you an idea of what the illustration is pointing to. If I knew, and so here's my question, here's my second question. If I knew that I have to pay somebody $35,875 at the end of this year, but I want to put it in a bank yielding 8% interest, how much would I have to put into the bank today so that that amount with the 8% is equal to $35,875? The number is $33,218. Take a deep breath. I warned you before we started talking about it. For those of you who have never seen this before, it couldn't get a little complex. But see if you can make these 3 gigantic leaps. First, someone promises to pay you income. Second, and you want them to secure that income by putting enough money in the bank today that the money will be there at the end of the year to actually make you that payment. Third, what I want to then assume is that when the end of the year comes, I can benefit from the 8% interest that it will generate while it's in that account. I think you can see where if I promise to pay someone $35,875 at the end of this year, but I can earn 8% on my investment, you can see why this is such a smaller amount. It's $33,218 because that, with the 8% interest, will make it so that I can make that payment of $35,000 at the end of the year. So I put that amount in the bank too. Now with Social Security, they don't just promise me 2 years. How long do they promise me that income? They promise it for a lot longer period of time. So what I'm going to do is take all of those longer period of times and do it real quickly. And I'll just show you this real fast. Remember, if you don't get the details, that's not the point. Just get the major concept. Look, here's all the benefits that Social Security promises to pay you. And it increases by 2.5% each year. So at the end of each one of these years, they're going to give you that much money. Or throughout the year, they're going to give you that much. Then what I say is, how much money would I have to put in the bank today so that if it earned 8% interest, I could make that payment on a guaranteed basis? All we do then is at the end of this, and we've calculated out there 45 years, we believe you're going to live there and receive that amount of money. We believe that, in fact, that you're going to live a lot longer in the future than you thought, but that's something we'll discuss at a later time. Right now, in order to now watch, this stream of future income payments, this is the stream right here, this stream of future income payments, and I'm going to get them every single year for the next 45 years. I'm going to take the amount of money I have to put away today in order to make that payment. and I'm going to put all those payments into the bank. That's kind of fun. So into the bank goes all those payments, all that amount of money that I'm having to put away today. That tells me I've got to put away a certain amount of money. In this case, it's got to be $582,576. That's how much I've got to put in the bank so that I can guarantee that I can make every single one of those payments to you long term. Can you see how? Can you see how all we've done is taken an income promise? This is the amount that the Social Security Administration has promised to pay you. We've taken that income promise and turned all that income promise into an asset equivalent amount. I could say on the first day that you started to receive that Social Security payment of $35,000 that the federal government, if you live for 45 more years, has made a promise to you that is worth $582,000. And that helps with our chart. Watch. Here's if we go right back to where we were before, and we go back to the chart that says, okay, this is how much I'm going to have with my $1 million choice, and I add to it the promise of Social Security. So here I'm going to add that promise of Social Security that they've made to you, or what its asset equivalent amount is right now, and you quickly see how much of a difference that makes in your point of choice. Here's the neat thing. Most people are not aware of this, but if you're married, when you start to receive that promise and your spouse has not worked a lot or worked much less than you have, then the spouse is guaranteed. Another way of saying that is the spouse is guaranteed to receive half of the highest income earner's Social Security or their own Social Security, whichever is the higher amount. So as an example, there's lots of situations today where an individual has gone out and worked and earned income while someone else has either stayed home with children or done something else that's made it so that they did not generate a very large amount of Social Security taxable income. What this means is that even though that individual has not generated a lot of Social Security income, they will receive at least 1/2 of the primary or the highest income earner's Social Security amount. So what I wanted to do with you is just do this. I want to take that 1/2 and I want to add to this Social Security. If you're married, I'm going to add to that. So you have a spouse. I'm going to add to this number right here, the half that the spouse would qualify for. And watch, it'll go up by about 1/2, whatever it is. And what it does is leap up here to where now this promise that the Social Security system has made to you, if you're 20 years old today, that promise is worth $3 million. Or it will be worth $3 million by the time you hit age 65. If you're 30, the promise will be worth about $2 million. If you're 40, the promise is worth about $750,000. You can see how that works. But now watch, here's one of the key points. Look what happened to my 60-year-old individual. There's a lot of people that will take this class. Will say, Brother Marsh, I'm 60 years old. I mean, what can I do now? Now, most of you that are 60 have already accumulated some financial resources. Remember this, we've assumed in this case that you have no financial resources whatsoever, and you're starting off at age 60 doing this planning that we're talking about right now. What I want to demonstrate to you is that literally with your home and the value that it will have by the time you reach age 65, your 401k, the accelerated debt reduction, the $1 million choices that we talked about, and with your Social Security, I want you to clearly see how you have sufficient income by that time. In fact, instead of having just asset equivalent numbers of $1.5 million, you actually have $3 million by that time. If you'll do it and do it correctly, you can see how critical and how huge of a difference that will mean. Some of this will not be completely understandable until either we've completed the rest of our classes or until we've had the opportunity to speak about this with you personally. But what I want to emphasize with the strongest degree of enthusiasm is something very simple. We can actually break this point of choice challenge down into 4 easy steps. Now, you tell me if you can imagine yourself, if you can believe it, if it's something that you could imagine yourself of achieving, that you could first of all purchase a home, which is obviously an important part of the formula. Some of you will see how you could actually not consider the home and still reach your point of choice value, and we'll talk about that. The second thing is that you put 10% into your 401k or some kind of an alternative investment if that's what we need to do. And we'll talk about alternative investments when we come to the investment portion of our lecture. And you do 1% into your accelerated debt reduction. We called it debt. You owe it to yourself to do something like this. That's just adding 1% of your annual income today to your accelerated debt reduction. On an average person's basis, that means $40 extra per month, and each year for the next 5 years. Now, we're going to keep it going forever if we can, but for right now, we've only built into our formula that you make $1 million choice, a 1% $1 million choice, which means that you find something that you can do that makes it so that you either live on less or you calculate your income or accelerate your income in such a way that you can put away an additional 1% each year. And this entire process makes it so that ultimately you have more money than you'll ever need. You remember those numbers. Don't remember the numbers, because ultimately what we're striving for is to have some gigantic form of huge wealth. Remember that number, because ultimately in this life, if you can become what we refer to as a multiplier, it's tough to be a multiplier. It's tough to put resources away. It's tough to count costs. It's tough to avoid making purchases that are unnecessary. It's tough to overcome the obvious human inertia associated with trying to accomplish something of significance. But I hope you can see in the formula a believable path, something that you could actually achieve yourself, and know that if you're willing to stick with that. The sad thing is people don't stick with it. The sad thing is that 90% of all individuals in America today are not going to be prepared for retirement. The hope, the vision, the confidence, and the faith that I'd like to provide for you is the fact that living on an average income, doing smart things that are all based on behavioral intelligence and based on the spiritual intelligence we talked about, that ultimately this objective can be yours. It can be part of the process that you can accomplish. And then with the other steps that we'll take as we go through the rest of the class, you'll quickly see that this is something that truly can be part of your future, and it can only make it so that the future is established for you in the same way that it was in the 111th section of the Doctrine and Covenants when we talked about it. As you take each of these steps, as you make yourself better able to accomplish one step, the opportunity, the vision, the potential, the innovations that will come to you as it results from the steps that you've taken will make it so that not only will this process become achievable, this can become an important and dynamic part not only of just having a large resource, but of also making it so that you make yourself available to those blessings that will never be possible if you don't take those first steps. Before the Lord put Adam and Eve on this earth, this is surprising to most people. What was the very first commandment? Now, of course, you put that in context of which one's the most important, that's different. What's the very first one that was ever stated? And if you go back to the book of Genesis, you'll find out that long before Adam and Eve even got to the earth, the Lord talked about multiplying and replenishing. Some people, and I think it's very acceptable, I tell my students at BYU why it's very important to understand that multiplication as indeed a tool of having more children. I think that's a very bold, noble, and desirable objective. I'd like to just consider one other possibility. It's in the 17th chapter of Luke. I want you to go look at the nobleman in the vineyard. And the nobleman in the vineyard, what they did was that as the nobleman left the vineyard, or the lord of the vineyard left the vineyard, he left some of the servants with some money. Now, it's been called talents, it's been called lots of things, but if you look right there in Luke 17, they use the word money. He left them with some money. And when he came back, after a period of time being away from the vineyard, he asked them what they'd done. He asked the first, "What have you done with that money that I gave you?" He said, and the servant replied, I multiplied it tenfold. Wow. What did the Lord of the vineyard say? He said, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." And instead of promising him more, he simply said, "Have thou authority over 10 cities. I love to tell my students this. What would it mean if somehow the process that we're talking about is not just somehow having a lot for yourself? What if it meant that the Lord of the vineyard would like to make it so that those who get good at multiplying resources for themselves are then put in a position where they can help others be inspired to multiply for themselves or to even multiply in behalf of those, as Mosiah chapter 4 tells us, that there will always be those who cannot do it for themselves. There will always be those who need to have help. And wouldn't you like to be one of those that the Lord of the vineyard could rely on to put in positions of authority so that you too could share this with other individuals? To the second laborer, he said, "What did you do with it?" He said, "I multiplied it fivefold." "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Have thou similarly authority over 5 cities." To the third he asked, "What did you do with it?" He said, "I buried it." Asked him why he buried it. He said, "Because I feared." How many? When things start to get tough, when those talk news channels start to get you sufficiently fearful and sufficiently concerned about the future, will suddenly pull everything out, get excited, maybe just grab the basic gear and think that somehow you're going to hunker down. I'll tell you, the prophets are replete with information and advice today that says to have confidence, to move forward with confidence, move forward knowing that we've been given the opportunity to be great multipliers. As you become a great multiplier, and can I just suggest to you that those steps that we've talked about here, I believe, follow the path that not only we would suggest is a good idea financially, but what I could document through the scriptures, through the prophetic utterances, and through everything else that we've been given, might just be the way heaven would have us multiply resources in such a way that we can not only be available to make expansive and innovative decisions, but also make those in behalf of other people. This is a great process. This is a great time of life. I believe that the future is alive and positive with new opportunities, as you will only describe more thoroughly as we continue this process of discovering together not only the beginning formula, but all the things that are necessary to make this work very well in your behalf. I know that it will be yours. I share that with you. Enjoy.